All right. Welcome everyone to this virtual IoT meetup. I'm Frédéric Desbiens from the Eclipse Foundation, your host. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this virtual meetup. One interesting thing this time compared to the other ones is that it's actually the first time I will be presenting myself on one of those meetups. And apologies for having delayed that one. We had, many things happen at the office earlier in June when I was supposed to speak about this, but I'm certainly glad to be with you today and talk about, the key findings in our 2019 Developer Survey. I really want this session to be interactive. This is not just about me just talking all the time. So I will be keeping an eye on my other monitor on the chat. So if you have any questions, comments, things that you want to discuss or talk about, it will be my pleasure to to keep an eye on the chat and try to make this session a bit more interactive. So don't hesitate to ask questions or comments. And as I said, I will try to take that into account. So once again, thank you very much for being there. And let's just get started. So I will share my screen and we'll have a look at those trends. All right, excellent. So it's very interesting this year to see how much continuity and yet how much change there has been in our developer survey. So this is the 5th developer survey that the Eclipse Foundation has been conducting. And this year was special for a few reasons, especially the great number of participants we've had. I think we have tripled the number of respondents for this year's survey, which makes certainly the analysis of the results a bit more interesting. So let's go forward a bit. So this is a slide deck that you can find on our website. So if you go to ioteclipse.org, you can download the same for yourself. And I will skip on some of the content like the executive summary in the introduction that gives you context about the survey to really get to the meat, to the thick of things. If there's one thing you should remember about the survey, essentially, it is that IoT is really experiencing a growth phase. In fact, if you look at the whole of the IT market, okay, consider servers, consider enterprise software, consider cloud. Servers and enterprise software are mostly flat, even a bit declining. Even smartphones that were a growth opportunity in the last few years have slowed down a lot, and this will certainly make things a bit more difficult for companies like Apple and Google going forward. So when you consider the whole IT market, the conclusion is that IoT is literally the last double-digit growth opportunity that you can have in the market. And I think that the findings in the survey really support that statement. In this case, our 2019 survey was really focused on addressing developers, people that are actually on the ground building stuff around IoT and understand what their needs are, what their concerns are. So this is really what we were focused about. One thing that we've remarked is that we had this year a higher number of respondents that were less technical, like product managers or directors. And our intent going forward is to have maybe another survey or something a bit different, specifically targeted at them, because we think that this could skew the results a bit if we have people that are not developers that answer very technical questions about what tools they use and that kind of stuff. In any case, the other thing I need to say before I start actually talking about the survey results and the insights is that what I will express is really my personal opinion. So that's That's really just me. That's not an official position of the Eclipse Foundation or anything like that. And what I will add to that is obviously, well, certainly my crystal ball is, well, I will try to use it a bit in order to extract insight from our results. But if my crystal ball was that good, I will be certainly a multi-billionaire or something. So I'm quite sure that I will be proven wrong in many, many things going forward, in the next few years. But it's still interesting to try to see where the market is going. All right. So with that said, once again, for those who joined us a bit late, I want this session to be interactive. So if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and I will try to integrate that in the discussion. All right. So the first takeaway is really something fundamental. The fact that 2/3 of our respondents stated that their organization is developing or will develop IoT solutions in the next 18 months. So when I was saying that IoT is really the last double or triple digit growth opportunity in the IT market, that's really a proof of it. People are past the point of proof of concepts or even minimal viable products. They are really building things that their organization will rely on going forward. And another way to see this is the fact that only 9% of the respondents answered that their organization has absolutely no plans to develop IoT. So IoT is all over the place. IoT is there today, and it will certainly play a growing role in our daily lives. So that's why we need, at Eclipse IoT, a solid roster of projects and technologies in order to support IoT developers. Now, if we dig a bit deeper, the top 3 concerns that IoT developers have in this year's survey, they are the same as last year: security, connectivity, data collection, and analytics. The interesting thing is connectivity really overtook data collection and analytics for the second place. And this shows the growing concerns that IoT developers have in picking a proper connectivity solution for their deployment. And I mean, if you think about it, should I use Bluetooth, standard Wi-Fi, Ethernet? Should I use LoRaWAN? Should I use satellite, LTE? Should I use Zigbee on another exotic protocol? I mean, there are so many technologies that you can leverage, and each of them has got its pros and cons. And sometimes, especially if you're a software developer, it's hard to pick the right one because you're not a networking expert. So to me, this is really telling that as an industry, we need to do a better job of offering guidance to potential users or even developers in picking the right technology stack. The other thing is whether you consider security, connectivity, or data collection and analytics, the Eclipse IoT portfolio is really in a unique position to address all those 3 concerns. And if we widen a bit our pool of results, considering the results over time, the top concerns from last year compared to this year, you will see that really there are quite a few things there that we pretty much care about at Eclipse IoT. If we review a bit a few of those top concerns, you will see, well, security is still the number 1 at 38. It was a bit over 40% last year, and the fact that it decreased a bit doesn't, in my opinion, show that security is not important anymore for IoT developers. In my perspective, this rather shows that with the increasing maturity of solutions that people have deployed, they have been able mostly to address their main security concerns and are looking at improving other aspects of their products, of their solutions. Which doesn't mean that security is not a challenge. It's pretty much is, especially when you consider all of the rogue IoT devices that can be hacked that are in the wild right now. But careful design of a solution and obviously forward thinking there will certainly help us, I think, solve that challenge of security going forward. Now, Security, as I said, is a growing concern at number 2. You see that it jumped, it had a sizable jump since last year. And as I said, with all the diversity that we've got in the market, this is no surprise. Data collection and analytics, slight growth there, but this simply shows the maturity of those solutions in the market. I mean, you have tons of solutions from Eclipse and non-Eclipse organizations in that space. And I mean, analytics in an IoT perspective is not that different from standard analytics and reporting, not that different from traditional big data approaches as well. And there's a lot of maturity in that segment, and that's why it's certainly not a growing concern. But if you look at the next 3, you see lots of growth there: performance, privacy, integration with hardware. And performance, especially, it's a tricky thing, because what could perform, let's say, if you have 1,000 sensors in the field, will not necessarily scale to 10,000 or 1,000,000. And as IoT really is expanding, then you will see more and more of those large-scale deployments. So performance will certainly be a growing concern. Privacy is another important thing. And people, that's a good news. They are starting to distinguish security from privacy. And those are 2 separate things. And to have a successful IoT solution, you need a clear, transparent, and accountable privacy policies. Okay, you should be upfront about what data you would be collecting and what you will use it for. And if you don't do that, then you do a disservice to yourself, to your organization, and obviously to the whole industry. Integration with hardware has grown a bit. And this is no surprise, once again, because if you pick a bunch of sensors, a board, and you're starting from scratch, then obviously integrating with what you've got on the board and playing with the sensors you have is a challenge. But not only that, if your solution has been around for a while, maybe your suppliers will discontinue some of the hardware bits that you depend on, and so you need abstraction layers and other tools that will make it easier to port your constrained device application to another hardware environment. I think that's really important, and the growth in integration with hardware, to me, shows that. And obviously, at the end, we've got ROI and standards are especially important, but not only standards. I mean, that's something I keep repeating, but I think it's worth repeating. Standards are one thing, but to do IoT the right way, you need to do it in an open source way, because your customers, your partners will ask you, what is the device actually doing? And they will ask you, okay, once your solution will not be supported, what happens? And open source is the solution, or open source is rather the answer to those 2 questions. And the growing interest in standards, to me, show the strength of that trend. All right, going forward now, IoT industry focus. So what are the relevant verticals to IoT? Well, in the case of Eclipse IoT, we are mainly at this point in time a community of software makers that essentially produce building blocks to build IoT solutions. So it's not surprising that the top level concern in our case has been IoT platforms at 34%. Essentially, building IoT platforms is important for many of our members, and especially our 3 strategic members, Red Hat, Bosch, and Eurotech, since they have large investments in wide-scale IoT solutions that are either already on the market or cooking somewhere in the backend. So if we put that a bit aside, because obviously the critical mass of software companies that we've got skews a bit the results, but home automation, industrial automation make up the top 3. And really, the fact that industrial automation is so important highlights how important it is for us to break the silos that exist between information technology and operational technology. So if you never heard before about operational technology, that's the word you use to describe whatever you have in your factory on the shop floor, so to speak. And it's really machines and the networking that are specific to industrial automation, whereas IT systems are obviously the traditional backends that most software developers are about. And typically, in most organizations, IT and OT have been pretty much separate, with little to no coordination, with completely different budgets and different priorities, that kind of stuff. And really, to reap the full potential of IoT, we need to have those silos disappear. All right. Now, if we look at the other industry focus areas that our respondents have mentioned, automotive, education, and building automation have been increasing a lot. So if we review each, automotive is a no-brainer. I mean, when you consider the modern car, okay, there's more than 100 different computers in there. Okay, not 20, not 40, more than 100. And all of those systems need to communicate with each other. All of those systems need to integrate. And the other thing is, they need to work well because lives are at stake. And that's not even considering autonomous driving and all the other technological developments in that space. So automotive is pretty much a huge concern for IoT, and that's why the Eclipse Foundation has a whole slew of automotive working groups that are alongside the IoT one. And most of those automotive working groups regroup many important car makers. Then education. Education, it's funny because when we were analyzing this internally at the Eclipse Foundation, building this slide deck, people were surprised in my colleagues around me about education. But to me, education is a no-brainer for IoT because obviously a connected campus, so to speak, and whether this is a college, a university, or even a very large high school, it makes sense to have, IoT technologies throughout the building. But IoT technologies are useful in the class itself. For example, if you are teaching, it could be useful to have maybe AI-driven analysis of the room, so that if you see that students are inattentive or showing their body language shows that they don't understand, then this is feedback that you could relay to the teacher or professor, and that would be certainly very useful. The same goes for interactivity in the classroom. And then, obviously, building automation is intimately connected to education, as I mentioned. And building automation is its own huge thing by itself. I mean, automated buildings have the potential to really improve our lives and make the workplace a more accommodating, a better place to be. And in those times where, well, especially in the IT market, the market is tight, there's a shortage of resources. Certainly, companies that invest in digital buildings have certainly a competitive advantage there in the comfort and ease of use that they provide to their employees. In the end, to me, the most significant of those three is certainly education, but that's just the former teacher here speaking. And this shows because in our results, education has had the biggest year-on-year percentage increase in mentions. All right. So we've discussed pretty much at this point in time business level, so to speak, trends. So let's now dig a bit and have a look at the more technical side of things. And once again, I will remind you, if you have questions or comments, you agree with me, maybe you don't agree with me, please don't hesitate to put comments in the chat, and trying to integrate that into this presentation. All right. So operating systems. So our survey was asking essentially people, what operating system and cloud stack are you using? Well, in the case of the cloud stack, obviously that's a cloud only. But if we consider the three aspects of IoT: constrained devices, edge nodes or gateways, and then IoT cloud platforms, Then we've asked people for each of those three categories what OS they've been using. So in this case, if we aggregate the data from both the constraint device and edge node category, and if we exclude Linux, because Linux is really the elephant in the room when you speak about OS in the IoT space. It's literally everywhere except for the most tiny constraint devices. Then the top three Linux accepted have been Windows, FreeRTOS, and no OS, which is not something I typically recommend, and I will certainly elaborate a bit more on that later. But really, most IoT developers see value in operating system because they implement common features and let them concentrate on business outcomes instead of reinventing the wheel because you need to write your own memory allocation or storage management layer. An interesting trend has been that Huawei's LightOS has been making inroads, nearly doubled its presence. And although no OS is mentioned as one of the top choices there, it dropped from 20% to 11%. And to me, that's really significant because as people have trouble working without OS, then definitely they pick one and go and run with it. So now looking at constrained devices, really FreeRTOS and the Amazon flavored version that's offered have both been dominating really the responses in our survey. But this question was really multiple choice. So people picked certainly FreeRTOS as the #1 choice, but there are many other standouts that people said they have been using. So the choices that have received more than 75% of mentions are Contiki and its reinvention Contiki NG, Embed OS, RiotOS, and QNX. And that certainly shows how much diversity there is in that space. You will remark that many of those solutions are open source and some of them are proprietary. Now, moving on edge nodes or gateways, and this is really, a net domination by Linux in that space. So Windows is certainly very, very common, but Linux is the one with the higher presence on edge nodes and gateways. And I mean, this is not surprising when you consider how flexible or malleable Linux is, especially with the wealth of device drivers it offers. So with very, very broad hardware support, it's not surprising to see Linux everywhere. Considering now a bit under the surface, a bit deeper, what exactly is important when considering to Linux distribution, you will see that Debian-based distributions have really the highest market share there. So both pure Debian and obviously Raspbian, the derivation for Raspberry Pi little boards, and Ubuntu Core have been mentioned a lot in our survey. And all three of them have been picked by at least a third or close to a third of our respondents, with CentOS, Fedora, and then Yocto as very frequent mentions as well. And this roughly replicates what you see in data centers. It's not really surprising, but certainly what is a bit different than the data center is, once again, the diversity in non-Linux operating systems over time. We see that most options have decreased, but VxWorks and Huawei have grown, and Zephyr from the Linux Foundation has been stable. So my expectation here going forward is certainly for the market to be a bit less diverse over time, as some of those options, especially the proprietary one, will probably be less important. And obviously, non-OS bare metal is something that I think will disappear because of the difficulty you have then to deliver actual business value on the top of the system level code you have to write if you're not using an operating system. All right, so that's about it for operating systems. Now digging a bit around the key hardware architectures that are the choice for IoT developers. On constrained devices, it's really there's little to no competition there, in the sense that all the top three architectures mentioned are all ARM based, and you see Cortex M0, M3, and M7. So depending on the power profile and the compute profile of the applications, then obviously one family will be picked over the other. But then the other 32% is really diverse. So we see lots of mentions of niche 8-bit, 16-bit, and 32-bit MCUs depending on the application. And that kind of diversity is with us to stay. Really, some applications require very little resource, but still some computing to be done. And then you go all the way to complex on-device AI pre-processing before sending that to the edge. One emerging trend that we'll keep an eye on is certainly open hardware. RISC-V was certainly mentioned a lot in those 32% that we are not detailing on the slide. And this trend, we expect it to increase over time, especially now that there's been a new entity founded called the Open Hardware Group, which is not offering just specifications for an ISA, but actual RISC-V core designs that you can take and customize. They are open source, and then get actual chips built on the top of that. So open hardware is certainly a trend that will be growing over time, and we'll keep an eye on it, you can be sure. If we consider now gateways and edge nodes, then ARM, once again, is really a dominant force over there. Various ARM variants are very common in gateways and edge, and this goes hand in hand with the support for Linux. I mean, Linux support for ARM is certainly more mature than what you will see on the Windows side, although Microsoft have been certainly improving in that area. And then Intel has obviously a strong showing in the space, especially in higher powered applications that will require more complex processing on the device, such as AI and high-end analytics on the edge. All right, spending some time now speaking about security. And I will just remind you, don't hesitate to use the chat if you have anything you would like to mention, or, well, if you agree or not with me, don't hesitate to let me know. A very important thing when you consider security is the three top level concerns there are really communication security, data encryption, and well, web tokens or their equivalent, so OAuth and all that that kind of stuff. That's really the top three that have been mentioned there. An interesting thing there is that virtualization has been mentioned by around 15% of the respondents in the survey, which means to us that container orchestration in the edge will become more and more important going forward. And good news, we've got solutions for that through Eclipse IoFog. And at the same time, we've got other approaches such as Eclipse Fog OS that could rely on containerization or virtualization as well. But then we realized that our question was asking virtualization in a very generic sense. And the way you define virtualization can be different than mine. So for next year, we will certainly expand on that and ask a few more questions or more precise questions in that area. All right, now, considering the key cloud platforms that are used by IoT developers. So this slide is really not surprising in the sense that the trio of AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform are the dominant platforms here. What's a bit surprising in our results is Amazon is number one, but by a tighter margin than what you will typically see in data center focused surveys. So to me, this is really interesting and shows that IoT developers are certainly probably a bit less locked into a specific cloud platform than what you will typically expect in the enterprise software market. Also, it seems that from the more detailed data in our survey, public cloud is making gains at the expense of OpenStack, on-premise, Kubernetes, and Cloud Foundry. All three platforms have been mentioned quite a lot, but let's say that they've been mentioned quite less than public cloud. And to me, this is a very interesting development. Because it seems that for IoT backends, organizations are a bit less shy about going the public cloud route, which can be explained by the fact that they certainly have IoT initiatives, but those initiatives are not as old as other IT systems that they are running. Now focusing on popular programming languages and protocols. Oh, and we've got a comment here. So before I go any further, so we have Saikat asking, what is the future trend on digital twin technology? We weren't asking specific questions about that, and this is something that we need to correct for sure. But when we looked in the writing comments, digital twins have been mentioned quite a lot. And in fact, one of the most popular projects in the Eclipse IoT toolkit at this point in time is Eclipse Ditto, which is an implementation of the digital twin pattern. And Eclipse Ditto, in turn, is a key part of Bosch IoT commercial offerings. So certainly we see lots of interest around it, anecdotally, but I must say that in my opinion, the digital twin trend is there to stay. It will not only stay, but it will expand, especially as we integrate additional technologies like virtual reality around IoT. Because then if you have a digital twin that's not only a dashboard, but an actual virtual reality or augmented reality thing, then this makes remote troubleshooting and even repairs much easier. So to me, digital twin is certainly a trend that will grow, but we need to measure that in a more precise way, certainly for the 2020 survey. So thank you, Saikat, for your comment. And well, don't hesitate, other listeners, other watchers, to submit your comments and questions as we go forward. So top 3 programming languages. Our question was really a big grid where we asked people, okay, whether you work with constrained devices, gateway, edge nodes, or IoT cloud, what are your top level languages that you are using? And so for constrained devices, it's not surprising to see C and C++ as really the top dogs. Especially C in low memory, low compute environments is an obvious choice given the maturity of the language and the fact that it's fairly easy to find C developers, although I would argue that finding top-notch C developers is a bit certainly a bit harder there. And then there's a strong showing by both Java and JavaScript, JavaScript being a proxy there probably for Node.js. This is not surprising, especially Java is showing there, given the number of Java/OSGI projects that we have in the Eclipse IoT toolkit. When we turn to gateways and edge nodes, then it's a bit of a different story. I mean, Java and Python have really been the two lead ones, and C++ and C pretty much, well, heavily used, but not as much as the top two. And I mean, it's only natural when you consider that gateways and edge nodes have less constraints than constrained devices by definition. You have more compute power. You are not necessarily operating on a battery when you have a gateway or an edge node, which means that cross-platform languages like Java and Python are good choices. And on the top of that, well, you have lots of diversity in CPUs, so ARM, various families of it, and Intel are very important. So the fact that Java and Python are easily cross-platform is certainly a plus for developers in that space. And then in the cloud, you won't be surprised to learn that Java, JavaScript, and Python are the top three. And we've got many mentions of PHP as well. And obviously, in this case, this is simply in line with the rest of the software world, so no big surprise there. So I think that the key takeaway here of that slide is that if you know Java and Python, you certainly have a very strong foundation to work around IoT. And if you want to focus on constrained devices, then freshening up your C and to an extent C++ is also very important. This is also proven by some of the projects we have in the Eclipse IoT portfolio. I mean, most of the constrained device projects we have, such as the Eclipse Wakama lightweight M2M client implementation, Eclipse Tiny DTLS, Eclipse MRAA and UPM, that are abstraction layers on the top of a real-time operating system. All of those are written in C, so the prevalence of C on constrained device is really no surprise. All right. Now looking at communication protocols. Almost half of people use HTTP, but obviously this is simply another way to say that most people use REST web services, and typically HTTP is the protocol of choice in that context. But we've got a very strong showing by MQTT. MQTT is nearly 20 years old now. It's very mature. It's very well supported in the Eclipse IoT portfolio with Eclipse PAHO, the various clients we've got there, and Eclipse Mosquito, the very popular MQTT broker. And then WebSockets has been the third choice, although you can use WebSockets over Mosquito, for example, so one doesn't necessarily exclude another. And before I go forward, we've got the comments. Are the languages ranked in the previous table? So talking about my programming language table. So for instance, C is more used than C++. So yeah, they are ranked on the slide. So C is number one for constrained devices. Java is number one for gateways and edge nodes and cloud. And then after that, you have number 2, 3, and 4 for each of the categories. So that's how the table is organized. Thank you for asking. Okay, so returning on our communication protocols. An interesting thing is that we've seen a strong showing by HTTP version 2, which is not that widespread when you consider web serving and that kind of stuff. So it's been interesting to see that. And CoAP, the constrained application protocol, is mentioned by about 1/3 of the people that have been mentioning MQTT. So only 15% of respondents have said they've been using CoAP over MQTT. So I'm not sure what exactly this means. Does this mean that people do more sensor monitoring than command and control applications, for which CoAP is a better choice? So we'll try to go a bit deeper for next year and understand what this means. One thing is sure, I mean, if you need CoAP, Eclipse Californium is certainly the dominant library in that space, and it's a very mature, very robust one. Now, switching gears and talking a bit about connectivity. The top connectivity protocols that have been mentioned have been generic TCP/IP, Wi-Fi, and Ethernet, and really, this is, I mean, this was really expected. No surprise there. But satellite and thread have been doubling since last year. And to me, this shows that we are slowly getting out of the domain of easy, you know, essentially the low hanging fruit is nearly done, nearly gone. The easy to do projects inside the digital building over Wi-Fi, for example, they have been deployed, and now people are experimenting with more ambitious initiatives that require specialized connectivity. But there is so much diversity. LPWA, Zigbee, 6LoWPAN, Z-Wave, satellite, each of them over between 8 and 15% in the survey. And once again, this goes back to my comment at the start, saying that connectivity is a growing concern. All that diversity is good in the sense that you can really pick the best protocol for your use case. But it's difficult to determine which one is the best, given all the various alternatives, and new ones keep emerging all the time. So to me, this really shows that we need to do, and especially the vendors of connectivity hardware need to do a better job of how would I say that? Positioning their various offerings there to make the developer's job easier. And it's up to us as well as an IoT community to do the job. So please don't hesitate to share your experiences with various protocols over our mailing lists or during our working group meetings so that we can explore that together. All right. Another interesting thing is that the Eclipse IDE is the tool of choice for IoT developers. So close to half of the respondents, 46%, between 45 and 46, I should say, are using the Eclipse Desktop IDE. And another 10% have been mentioning the Eclipse Shea, which is our cloud IDE that we are working on. And this is, to us, really a pretty huge validation of the work we've been doing, well, in the case of the Eclipse Foundation, since 2004. There are strong showings from Visual Studio Code and Notepad++ as well. And Visual Studio Code especially has been growing, which is not surprising to anybody who's been coding in the last few years. I mean, the tool has been around for a while. It's getting better plugins all the time. So certainly the fact that it's on a surge there is not surprising. To me, this shows as well that well, there is little to no money to be made in IDEs, in the sense that all those tools are free. So apart from the full fat Visual Studio, which was barely mentioned in our survey, I mean, most of the dominant IDEs mentioned in the survey are open source or free. And to me, that really says something about the state of IT. The Eclipse Foundation has been perceived by the respondents to our survey as the most influential IoT organization. So 57% of the respondents said that they look to the Eclipse Foundation, and specifically the IoT Working Group, as a reference in IoT, with very numerous mentions of the Apache Software Foundation and the Linux Foundation as well. And when you consider the IT market, this is not surprising. And to be honest, we compete up to a point in the sense that there are great projects at Eclipse, great projects at Apache, great projects at DLF. But ultimately, to me, what's more important is the fact that more and more developers understand that building an IoT solution must be done the open source way. And the fact that our three leading organizations in the survey are open source foundations really shows the truth of that trend. But it's not just about open source, because you go on GitHub, you will find tons of open source libraries for all sorts of things around IoT. But at the same time, not open source is the same. Yes, you may find whatever you want on GitHub, but what's the development process? What's the development model? What's the long-term viability of whatever library you found? So more and more people turn to organizations like Eclipse, Apache, and the Linux Foundation for that, because we think that we provide value that simple individual open source projects simply cannot. And what makes the Eclipse Foundation special is really our focus on intellectual management property. The fact that we pretty much care about the licensing and the origin of the code, and that we keep checking that as our projects do releases, is really something that sets us apart in the market. Last but not least, what makes our IoT Developer Survey credible is that more than 80% of the respondents are active in real IoT project, with a full 40% busy working on IoT solutions at work, and 10% building it in their spare time, like I was doing before joining the foundation full-time to focus on IoT. And I mean, we did a distinction between develop in their spare time versus learn in their spare time. So really, full 10% of respondents are building something that maybe they hope will become a new startup or a new company at some point. So that's really exciting. And another 10% have been researching IoT solutions, so probably for future projects and stuff like that at their job. And once again, to me, this really shows how healthy, how important the IoT market is going forward, since we have so many people actively working or building their skill set to be able to ride the next wave of developments in the space, and be able to take advantage of the job opportunities and business opportunities that are ahead. All right. So that's it for the survey, or the review of the key findings of the survey. Before I switch to full question or conversation mode, I'd like to remind you that Eclipse IoT has a newsletter that you can subscribe to. So you can go to ioteclipse.org, and we've got a button on the homepage that you can click in order to subscribe. And we've got our own Twitter account, Eclipse IoT, where you can follow us as well. So you can get the slide deck, the full slide deck, on the Eclipse IoT website. So let me show you where. So if I go to ioteclipse.org, you can simply navigate then to the resources section. Okay, you've got case studies and stuff there, and you've got the community section as well. So in our case, the IoT Developer Survey is in the resources section, and you've got the slide decks for each and every of the 5 IoT Developer Surveys we've run since 2015, both in PDF and on SlideShare in HTML format. So don't hesitate to download it, spread it. This is public information that you can share and use. And if you have suggestions, concerns, things that you would like us to ask in the next one, because we've been busy preparing the 2020 edition of the developer survey, then don't hesitate to reach out to me on either on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever channel you feel comfortable with. It will be a pleasure for me to take that feedback into account and try to improve the survey for it to be even more useful for next year. At this point in time, I'm done with the formal content, but I'm certainly more than happy to stay around and, well, simply try to have a little chat with you through the YouTube chat that we've got. So it's really up to you guys. If you have questions, I can certainly wait a few seconds for them. If not, well, feel free to to disconnect as well. It's really up to you. So any questions or concerns that I could have missed? Let me have a look at the chat. One comment we've had was that TCP IP overlaps with Wi-Fi and Internet when we discuss connectivity. You are perfectly right in saying that. So the question had been poorly worded there, and will improve the way we are asking those questions to really ask about network layer protocols versus software layer protocols and data transports. Really make a clear distinction going forward. So unfortunately, this will break our nice time series where we can compare from one year to another, but that's certainly feedback that we've had about the survey and something we are looking forward to improve. So thank you very much for the comment that you've made there. Any other questions or comments at this point? Now would be the time to ask it. Looks like there are no more questions or comments. So, well, thank you so much for attending this edition of the virtual IoT Meetup. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Next time will be in August. So normally on August 20, we'll have a presentation about the DDS protocol. So DDS is an alternative to CoAP and MQTT, where essentially all the devices in the network are a mesh. So you wouldn't have a DDS client that is not a server at the same time, so to speak. And this makes DDS a very interesting choice for automotive and robotics applications. So we'll have normally somebody from the Eclipse Cyclone DDS project telling us everything about Cyclone DDS, a specific implementation of the protocol. And certainly looking forward to hear about that. So if on the other hand, there are topics you would like to be covered in this meetup, specific speakers, specific topics, specific technologies that you would like to hear about, once again, don't hesitate to reach out. And obviously, we'll try to take that into account. And I see a last minute question there. So Gian Ricardo asking, which kind of constrained devices uses Java? Well, obviously, certainly not the very, very tiny ones with 64 kilobytes of memory and stuff like that. Typically, you will see that in intelligent cameras and systems that really will have a higher power and compute budget. For example, there are specialized devices that will harvest locally the data from multiple sensors. So Java could be an interesting choice there. But obviously, the Java usage we'll see in the space will be around smaller implementations of the JDK. Java, since Java 8, Java Standard Edition 8 is much more modular. So what I've seen, at least personally, is not usage of full-fat JVMs on constrained devices, but a selective packaging of modules there. And we've seen also some OSGI usage. So we have a very tiny OSGI implementation, which is called Eclipse Concierge in the Eclipse IoT Toolkit. And we've seen some adoption of that in smaller devices. But obviously, if your device has a 50 megahertz processor with 64 kilobytes of memory, this is not a space where Java will be a factor, except maybe through cross-compilation, somebody who would be using a cross compiler to translate from Java to native C code. But this is not something I've seen a lot personally, or something I would even recommend for sure. All right. If there are no any more questions or comments, I will end the broadcast there. The broadcast there. Sorry about that. So thank you so much for attending once again, and I look forward to see you in August, on August 20, for our next edition of the virtual IoT Meetup. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.